Crown Royal is staying on LCBO shelves, and the political standoff that's been unfolding for months has finally landed somewhere. But the way this entire situation played out says a lot about how governments negotiate, how corporations respond, and how communities get left behind in the process. What started as a dramatic feud between Premier Doug Ford and Diageo has now turned into a $23 million agreement. And depending on who you ask, it's either a victory, a compromise, or a distraction from the real issue. To understand how we got here, you have to go back to the moment Diageo announced it was closing its Amherstburg bottling plant. This wasn't just a corporate restructuring. It was a blow to a community that's been tied to Crown Royal production for decades. 200 workers suddenly facing uncertainty. Families wondering what comes next. A region that's already seen its share of industrial decline, now staring down another closure. And in Ontario politics, that's the kind of thing that sparks a reaction. Ford didn't just react, he went full theater. The moment he poured out a bottle of Crown Royal at a press conference, slowly and deliberately, it became clear this wasn't going to be a quiet negotiation. It was a message to Diageo and to voters. Ontario jobs matter, and he was willing to make noise to protect them. Whether you saw it as performative or principled, it set the tone for everything that followed. It was Ford doing what Ford does, leaning into symbolism, leaning into spectacle, and making sure the cameras caught every second of it. But as the weeks went on, the tone shifted. Ford started talking about offering Diageo an olive branch, signaling that the door wasn't closed. He wanted them to show commitment to Ontario in other ways, even if the Amherstburg plant was still shutting down. And that's where the $23 million comes in. Diageo agreed to invest heavily in the province. $11 million in grain-neutral spirits sourced from Eastern Ontario, $5 million in Ontario-based marketing and promotion, and $3 million in ready-to-drink production through a Toronto co-packer. Ford framed it as a victory, proof that standing firm forced a multinational corporation to put money back into the province. He said it strengthens supply chains, protects jobs, and supports Ontario workers. But one of that changes the fact that the Amherstburg plant is closing. 200 people are still losing their jobs. And that's where the criticism comes in. Windsor West MPP Lisa Gretzky didn't hold back. She pointed out that not a single dollar of the $23 million goes directly to the workers who are actually affected. Only 4% of the investment touches the Windsor-Essex region at all. Her message was sharp. The plant is still closing, families are still facing job loss, and the government shouldn't expect applause for a deal that leaves the hardest-hit community behind. By the way, here's a fun fact. MPP Lisa Gretzky is the cousin-in-law of former hockey player Wayne Gretzky through her husband Tyler Gretzky. When governments negotiate with corporations, there's always a gap between the headline and the human impact. Investments look great on paper. They sound strong in a press release, but they don't always translate into support for the people who are actually losing their livelihoods. To understand why this deal unfolded the way it did, you have to look at the bigger picture. Diageo is a global company. They make decisions based on efficiency, cost, and long-term strategy, not local politics. The Amherstburg closure wasn't random. It fits a pattern we've seen across industries: consolidation, automation, and shifting production to fewer, more centralized facilities. It's the same story that's played out in auto plants, food processing, manufacturing, you name it. Companies streamline, communities absorb the impact. And that's why Ford's boycott threat mattered. Ontario is Diageo's biggest market in Canada. Losing LCBO shelf space would have been a major hit, but it also would have created collateral damage in other provinces. Diageo has facilities in Manitoba and Quebec, and both provinces were watching closely. A boycott in Ontario wouldn't just hurt Diageo. It would ripple across supply chains, distribution networks, and jobs in multiple regions. Manitoba Premier Wab Kinnew was especially vocal. He urged Ford to back down, warning that escalating the conflict could jeopardize jobs in his province too. After the deal was announced, he said he was relieved and pointed to ongoing investments in the Gimli facility as a sign that its future looks stable. Quebec's finance minister also welcomed the decision, reinforcing that this wasn't just a local dispute. It was a national concern with real economic implications. Ford had previously warned that Diageo might move all Canadian production to the U.S., a claim the company denied. But the fact that the warning was even on the table shows how high the stakes were. Losing Crown Royal production entirely would have been a major blow to multiple provinces, not just Ontario. And that brings us to the heart of the story. Leverage. Who has it, who uses it, and who pays the price when it's exercised. Premier Doug Ford used political leverage. He used public pressure, media attention, and the threat of a boycott, while Diageo used economic leverage and the reality that they control production, distribution, and investment decisions, while the provinces used regional leverage and kept reminding Ontario that its actions affect more than just its own borders. But the workers in Amherstburg, they didn't have leverage. They had uncertainty. They had a closure notice. They had a future that suddenly looked very different. And that's the part that gets lost in the headlines. Because while the province celebrates the investment and Diageo celebrates the resolution, the people who actually built the product, the ones who bottled it, packaged it, shipped it, are still facing job loss. They're still figuring out what comes next. They're still dealing with the fallout of a decision made far above their heads. This is where the conversation needs to shift. Not just did Ontario get money, but what does this mean for the communities that lose out? Not just is Crown Royal staying on the shelves, but what happens to the people who made it possible for decades? Not just did the government secure investment, but did the government secure support for the workers who are directly affected? Because at the end of the day, this isn't just a story about whiskey. It's a story about how we value labor. It's a story about how governments respond to corporate decisions. It's a story about the gap between political wins and real-world outcomes. And it's a story that's still unfolding. The $23 million is committed. The boycott is off. The shelves stay stocked. But the real question, the one that matters, is what happens next for Amherstburg. Whether new opportunities come in, whether the community gets support, whether this becomes another chapter in a long pattern of industrial loss, or the moment that sparks something better. Because the truth is, a bottle staying on a shelf doesn't fix the deeper issue. It doesn't replace a job. It doesn't rebuild a community. It doesn't answer the question of how we protect workers in an economy where corporations can shift production with a single announcement. So yes, the political drama is over. The deal is done. But the real story, the human story, is just beginning. That's all for now. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see y'all in the next one.